Hi, my name is Angie Taylor, and my personal change project is on disposable face masks. So, face masks. As we all know, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a whole new norm for everything, and particularly the use of face masks in public settings. Face masks are used to limit the spread of disease, and while it's somewhat debated politically over whether or not we should be wearing face masks, in reality, they do help prevent the spread of COVID-19 by preventing water droplets from the nose and mouth to enter the atmosphere and infect other people. So in many places, wearing a mask in public has become a legal requirement to go to places like the grocery store or use public transportation or enter other stores. So this increased use of face masks was shown in this statistic. In 2020, the United Nations estimated that global mask sales will total some 166 billion. This went up from around 800 million in 2019. And disposable masks make up 90% of those worn by the public, which means 10% of masks used are non-reusable ones. So why I chose disposable face masks for my project. At the start of the pandemic, I was using mainly disposable masks while living at home. I wasn't really going outside a lot because of the mandatory lockdown, so I really only had to wear a mask when I went to the market or out to stores or went for walks or things like that. But after moving into the dorms in Yaki Tutu, I had to wear a mask every single time I left my room, to go to the bathroom, to go to the dining hall and walks. And I noticed that I was using a large amount of disposable masks because they would get kind of gross at the end of the day. I would throw them away. So I chose to focus my project on this to both reduce my personal use of disposable masks and also to learn about the impacts on the environment. This is something that's fairly new and, I hate to use this word, but unprecedented. So I thought it would be an interesting topic. So I'm going to start with my graphs and charts from both phases 1 and 2. Down here is my data that I collected throughout the entire project. You can see phase 1 here in the yellow, and then phase 2, weeks 1 through 4 of phase 2, following the first week of phase 1. And so my first graph depicts the daily comparison by week. So in this graph, I also wanted to show each day how many face masks I used, and also by the week because I only used about 1 or 2 on average per day. So here you can see in phase 1, which depicts the first week, on Monday I used only 1, whereas on Wednesday I used 2. You can see from that 2 to 4. And then the total for that week was 8. And then phase 2 is shown broken up into 4 weeks. In this second graph over here on the right, or left, with the blue columns, you see week 1 through 5 altogether, week 1 being phase 1, 2 through 5 being phase 2. And here you can see that my weekly use really drastically decreased for disposable masks. Week 1, which I did not change my habits, was 8 masks, whereas week 2 was 2, week 3 was 2, week 4 was 1, week 5 was no disposable masks. So the process. During phase 1, I continued with my regular everyday use of face masks. I would use a new one every morning, use it throughout the day, and then at the end of the day, I would cut the strings and dispose of it. And then also during phase 1, I purchased my reusable face masks for phase 2. I bought about 7, and I went to the store and brought those back to my dorm to be used during phase 2. So throughout weeks 2 through 5, I made an effort to only use my reusable masks when leaving my dorm. And at the end of the week, I would wash all 7. So I kept them together and I'd wash them with the rest of my laundry. And so yeah, so overall, this was pretty successful. I was able to decrease my use. Some issues that I did have though, and some faults in phase 2, were that when my reusable mask became dirty, I would often borrow a disposable mask, so that happened a few times throughout the month. And I also locked myself out of my dorm room a couple of times and had to borrow disposable masks from people on my floor to go and get a new key. In hindsight, though, some ways that I thought of to mend these issues could be to keep a reusable mask in my car or in my purse, so that if it became dirty or lost or I needed to use a different one, I would have another reusable mask to use instead. So the outcomes of this. Overall, it was pretty successful. From phase 1 to 2, I decreased my use from approximately 1.14 to 0.17 disposable masks per day. I did the math by finding the difference of this, multiplying by 7 and then by 4, and found that this decrease saves around 27 masks per month from my own personal use, which I would say is a fairly positive outcome. I thought that was higher than expected. So the impacts on the natural environment. For my research on the impacts on the natural environment, the research was interesting because a lot of the articles were from the beginning of the pandemic, in which mask use was very different. Many of the articles would talk about how masks would only be used for a few months, and that's not what ended up happening. So it was interesting and made it a little bit more difficult, especially because I couldn't research long-term impacts quite as much. But I thought it was an interesting topic. So the three main impacts on the natural environment that I found were human health, wildlife, and plastic pollution. So first was human health. This discussed litter, so that would be the pollution of masks in public spaces, in the ocean, and bodies of water. So the virus can survive up to on the surface of a mask for up to 7 days in certain conditions. So this could be an issue for people picking up litter in communities, and it can cause them to become infected with diseases. In fact, the incorrect disposal of masks could cause people who pick them up to be infected with even COVID-19. Another big issue to human health was the uptake of toxic microplastics by marine life can end up in foods that humans eat. So when the masks that are made of plastic end up in bodies of water and biodegrade, those microplastics are uptaken by marine wildlife and can enter human food sources through that. The second issue was wildlife. So the plastic material that masks are made out of can smother plants when they cover them on the ground. They may also be mistaken as food by wildlife, like many other plastics that have been discussed, like plastic bags, which can cause choking and lead to death, and also malnourishment, because when the animals fill their stomach with those plastics, there's no nutrition, and they become malnourished. Animals can also become tangled in the strings of the masks, the parts that go around your ears, and the breakup of the plastics in marine ecosystems can introduce microplastics into the food chain and have detrimental impacts. And animals and plants that ingest and absorb these toxins can be poisoned, and this can have lethal effects. So plastic pollution. Plastic pollution is an already existing threat to our natural environment. As a result of COVID-19, there's been a lot more plastic output because of takeout Tupperwares, not using reusable bags at grocery stores, and of course, the use of face masks. The non-reusable masks are made out of plastics like polypropylene, which take around 450 years to biodegrade, which means that the masks that we're using at large numbers now will be here for up to 450 years on this planet. And according to the United Nations, if historical data is a reliable indicator, it can be expected that around 75% of the used masks, as well as other pandemic-related waste, will end up in landfills or floating in seas, which will have detrimental impacts on our ecosystems and wildlife. So here I wanted to point out an example of masks being showing up on coastlines. These masks were found by a marine conservation group called Ocean Asia, collecting face masks along the coast of the Soko Islands in Hong Kong. Here you can see this guy holding a ton of masks and the masks with other plastic pollution up on the beach. So overall, my findings and my conclusion from this were to cut the straps to prevent animals from getting tangled. So if you are going to use disposable masks, that's something that I've been doing and something that you can do. Another thing I learned, which isn't necessarily quite as relevant, but something I thought I'd share from my research, is to not put the masks in recycling bins, because sanitation workers have to sort them and can become infected through the masks, and they have to sort them with their bare hands all the time, and the elastic gets caught in machinery, so the masks aren't actually recyclable anyways. But overall, my conclusion is that it's more worthwhile to be using reusable masks. It's just important to make sure that the masks you use have 3 layers of material in order to be effective. The plastic masks that are disposable have those 3 layers of material. And so if you're going to buy reusable masks, which you should, buy ones like this one that are nice and thick. You can see how it has all 3 layers, or this one right here. And yeah, I would encourage all of you to go ahead and buy some reusable masks if you have not, for the reasons I have discussed. Here's my works cited with all of the websites that I used. I had to do a lot of research because this is a slightly newer topic, you know? And yeah, so thank you all for listening. I hope you all have wonderful weeks, and I hope you took something away from my presentation.